അവിടുന്ന് മണ്ണിറങ്ങണം എന്നെ അവിടുന്ന് മാനസിക ട്രാവലിംഗ്.
Hey everyone, it's Sam, and welcome back to the 911 Nonsense podcast. To stay in the loop, learn about upcoming guests, and join in the conversations with the Noon community, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And hey, if you like what you hear in this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support means the world to us. On this episode of Noon, Gwenny, a flight nurse, educator, and author, shares her journey into critical care and transport medicine. From her unconventional teaching style to her experiences flying for hospital-based programs, Gwenny highlights the challenges and rewards of a fast-paced career in EMS. With a decade of nursing experience, Gwenny's passion for education shines through her business, Nurse Gwenny, and her book, But Why, which helps providers grasp the why behind critical care decisions. She also opens up about balancing multiple roles, prioritizing self-care, and the lessons that she's learned from EMS. Don't miss this candid and inspiring conversation with a true EMS advocate. Let's get started. Are you ready to ace your NREMT exam? Pass with Pass has everything that you need, from expert-crafted study guides to online, on-demand NREMT review courses. Created by a pair of EMS educators with over 38 years of experience, Pass with Pass has taken the stress out of studying with proven techniques that actually work. If you're an EMS educator or EMS agency leader, both discounts are available to support your student success. So stop procrastinating, start studying, and pass with Pass. Visit www.passwithpass.com and enter the discount code NOON, that's N-O-O-N, for a 20% discount. All right, Nurse Gwenny on the 911 Nonsense podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Can I go ahead and get an introduction?
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here. I know you've had some pretty big guests in the past, so the seat is big to fill. So my name is Nurse Gwenny. I'm Gwenny Winkler. It's weird saying that. I just got married several months ago, and it's still weird saying my new name. But I am a flight nurse. I'm an educator. I still work in the ER, and then I run my Nurse Gwenny business as a side gig, about 10 to 20 hours a week, just making education. And somebody commented yesterday on one of my videos, they said, where do you get all the ideas for this stuff? And I commented very honestly, I said, most of it is intrusive creativity. Right? So at 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm like, oh my gosh, that would be such a good idea. So I email myself and then I don't open them until I'm ready to make that video. And so I currently, as of this morning, have 122 unread emails from me to me of content creation ideas. So kind of how Nurse Gwenny got started was my one of my two best girlfriends. She was a full-time flight paramedic at the time, and she kept asking me, why is albuterol part of my crush injury protocol? Those patients aren't having a hard time breathing. Why is XYZ? And she'd always ask me why. I said, yeah, sure. And then I explained why. And she's like, why did nobody ever teach it that way? And I got enough of those questions of when I would teach and people would say, gosh, that's so easy to understand. Why aren't more people teaching it this way? I saw a need for there are people like me who, when I first started flying and studied to pass my CFRN, I just memorized a bunch of information and I passed, but I didn't understand why I was being asked to do the things that I was doing. And so it took years of me struggling through watching a YouTube video over here and buying med school textbooks on Amazon and reading this and asking that expert to where I figured out the why on my own. And I was like, well, if I struggled with it and my bestie struggles with it, I bet there are other people. So that's kind of why I teach in the very unconventional ways that I do.
And that is a fantastic way to teach. So, your book, right? What's the title of your book?
But why? It's called But Why? Going beyond the what so you can understand the why of critical care transport medicine.
That is fantastic. And you hit the head of the nail when you said, you can memorize all of this stuff for these tests and take the
Hmm.
test and pass the test, but still not understand. And that's something that I also learned in the last few years where like I didn't take any type of a critical care class or anything outside of like flight bridge, IA med, like stuff like that until I was taking the test and I could memorize all of those.
Hmm.
And I did memorize all those to take the test. And then I still felt insignificant because I didn't have that knowledge base and still often struggle with it. That was actually something I was thinking about this morning where I watched, do you watch Foam Frat at all? I know that's kind of like a competitive service there, but
Not really. They do great work, though. I will say they are a tough competitor for my job because they do such a good job.
they do a really good job.
A rising tide brings up all ships. So I want them to do better because it forces me to do better.
That is such a great way of like you are an amazing business person. I don't know you very well, but that is just the the most amazing business thought that you can have to make yourself better. That's fantastic. Um, but I had watched one of their videos where they interviewed a doctor and talked about clamping the tube before you disconnect to switch to a vent, correct?
Mhm.
And I guess because I came into critical care kind of late, right? I was starting to hit my critical care right as COVID came around. And I will tell you that because I took the class, like I took the class and I did that with air quotes there. I took the class and I studied really hard. I was never taught to clamp that tube. So when I was introduced to clamping the tube, it was to prevent the spread of COVID. And now they're like, no, we do it to save PEEP.
Recruitment, yes.
Yes.
So not every patient requires it, right? Those with healthy alveoli, they're okay without it. But think of how hard we have to work to recruit alveoli in a patient with ARDS, right? Their alveoli are not like the balloons that we like to compare them to, where they stretch and comply with the breath. They're more like a Ziploc baggie that squish when you let the air out. And then it's really hard to recruit them back to gain that. That doesn't happen in one breath.
No.
I've had patients where it takes me 10 minutes to re-recruit them after, an ET tube disconnect or swapping tubes and not clamping it. So yeah, it is important to understand the why because you probably in your mind had created the why was for infectious control,
Yes.
but really it's for salvaging that PEEP that we
Yeah.
worked so hard
PEEP
for.
recruitment. Yeah. And it's just so funny because there have actually been like no really good studies on that. So the doctor was saying that he was like, well, without studies, there's no way to say whether it does or whether it doesn't. But he made it seem like, meh, like you can do it if you want to, but you know what I mean? So it's just
Yeah,
so
yeah.
funny.
In my experience, I've seen people like I listened to Heavy Lies the Helmet has an old episode. It's probably 3-ish years old with a pulmonologist. I think his name was Dr. Sharma, if I remember that correctly. I could be wrong about that. But they interview him and they're talking about tube clamping. And one doctor will talk about how it's so important to clamp the tubes on your ARDS patient before you switch vent circuits. And other pulmonologists will say, not really. And you're right, there isn't a ton of literature out there about it, but you only got to get burned by it once, right? The patient that I
Yes.
always remember is the one who we clamped the tube when we switched over from the hospital vent to our vent. However, as ET tube circuits always do, the vent circuit came detached from the ET tube circuit, and it took us 10 minutes to re-recruit that guy. And it was PEEP as at the time we had the Revell. We didn't have the Hamilton T1s yet. It took us the PEEP of 20, cranking that baby all the way up and calling our medical director because at the time we weren't allowed to go above 12 without contacting medical direction to re-recruit them. And we had to fight so hard. And so it's that one patient has reinforced with me with my ARDS patients, I better be clamping.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And it's great that you have that history to be able to say, yes, it did work for that patient, but you also now have that knowledge base to decide if you need to clamp or if you don't need to clamp for specific patients. So how long have you been a nurse?
So I've been a nurse for 10 years. I started flying right at, you got to have your 3 to 5 years experience. I was just over my 3 year mark when I started flying. And I have flown for 3 different companies. I flew for a large company that everybody would recognize for about 2.5 years. Then I went back to the hospital during COVID because money, right? And so I did travel
Yes.
contracts for a year and I really missed flying and I wanted to go back to it. So I went back to flying. Uh, and the company just wasn't for me. It didn't have the same educational standards that I had been accustomed to and I had come to expect from my first company that I flew for. It wasn't a good fit for me. I won't say that it was a terrible company. It wasn't in line with what I had expected and what I had come to be used to. And so I left that to come to teach full time for, at the time we were IA Med, now we're Impact EMS. But I still missed flying, and I didn't want to be teaching critical care if I wasn't still doing critical care. So
Yes.
that was why I got a PRN job. I fly for a hospital that's 3.5 hours from my house. So on days that I do shifts, I get up at 3:30 in the morning. I drive 3.5 hours. I get there. I work a 24-hour shift and I drive 3.5 hours home. And people are like, that's nuts.
That is
Why,
nuts.
number one, do you not move down there? And well, my kids go to school here. Our house is here. Our lives are here. And they're like, yeah, but get a job closer to home. But this program that I fly for is absolutely incredible. It's a small program, right? It's not a huge company that has 400 bases. We have two air bases and one ground base. We all rotate through all three vehicles, both of our helicopters and our ambulance. So it's a variety of what I get to do. Because it's a hospital-based program, I get whatever clinical experience I want. I can go observe in the high risk OB. I can go get a bunch of tubes in the OR if I want to. I can swing through the CVICU and hang out with a nurse who's taking care of a fresh heart if I haven't seen a swan in a while. I can go to the PICU. I can go to any unit I want and get tons of clinical experience because you know this as flying, there are things that we don't see all the time. Like I said, I've been
No.
flying since 2018, so I'm 6 years into my flying, and I've only ever transported two Swan Gans lines. That's not enough to maintain
No,
proficiency.
it is not.
And I teach it all the time. So that is a surrogate for maintaining some proficiency, but nothing is as good as actual hands-on experience. So I really like the CVICU is my favorite place to go observe because it is some of those high acuity, low frequency things. So I get to go down there and see those things and be like, ah, yes, yes, okay, it's all coming back to. That's what I think every time I see something that I haven't seen in a long time.
Do you have ADHD?
No, I don't. People tell me all the time, like, oh, you have ADHD. I'm like, no, I just have a really busy brain. When I get to focus on something, like I've never taken Ritalin or anything like that. All I have to do is just be motivated to focus on something. And like a hurricane could happen around me and I wouldn't notice because I'm like hyper focused. So I don't know, maybe I do have ADHD and I just don't realize that I do, but
It does sound like it, but there's nothing wrong with that, right? Especially it can be like a superpower if you know how to hone it in, and it sounds like you do
yeah,
know how to hone it in.
yeah.
So that is fantastic. What would you suggest to people who um so you said you're hospital based, but what would you suggest to people to get that clinical experience for who work for jobs that aren't hospital based, right? So like I work in a flight company, fixed wing only, and we are not hospital based. So it's really hard to get any type of clinical work unless I get a second job.
People ask me this all the time. I'm like, go get paid for your clinical experience. Go work a PRN job, which isn't ideal, right? To add, I don't know what your schedule is. My best friend who used to work for a fixed wing service, she did 8 days on, 6 days off. So it's not ideal for her to have had another job. It might not be possible with your family or where you live, especially someone who works or lives rural. You're not going to have a hospital with a CVICU with up-to-date, modern, high-tech practices. That's just the reality of rural America is we don't have the resources to have cardiovascular surgeons in a town where one person a week needs a cabbage.
Let me take it one step further and give it to you from a paramedic's perspective, right? So like I'm not going to get hired in the CBICU because I'm not a nurse and I'm a little more qualified than just a tech, or a medical assistant. And I don't mean like just a tech because a lot of people do that as their job and it is a very meaningful job. But paramedics sit at that kind of middle level where we're getting paid a little bit more than MAs and techs, but not as much as nurses. So we don't have a role in those units yet.
Sure, I hear what you're saying, and I am so excited about the expansion of medics into the hospital setting. And I would say if the CVICU where you want to work doesn't have a role for medics yet, then maybe take one for the team and take one of those tech jobs that's going to suck in the short term show them how useful paramedics are. Like the ER where I work at, PRN, we have medics that work 10A to 10P, and we usually have three on at a time, and they have full scope. They are not techs. We also have techs, which we, as you just said, like, techs are such a valuable part of the team, right? But they're not the same as the techs. They have a much wider scope. As a matter of fact, there are things that our medics can do that our nurses cannot. And there's only a couple of things that nurses can do that medics cannot, such as start blood products. You've got to have the two nurse check on that. They also, this one blows my mind, they cannot triage a patient. I'm like, that's literally what medics are created for.
Yeah, it is.
But they can't triage, they can't do the initial assessment, and they cannot discharge a patient. But other than that, medics can take a whole team in the ER. And we have some medics who will take a whole team. They just get the charge nurse to chart the assessment and to chart the discharge on the patient, but they do everything else. They a lot of times just kind of float our emergency department, and they'll start all the ultrasound guided IVs. If sometimes they'll break the nurses for lunch, they can, babysit the team of patients while the nurse goes and gets lunch. But they're phenomenal. They can intubate in our ER, and I foresee COVID was terrible. COVID did a lot of really awful things, but there are good things that have come out of COVID, right? There are so many things that we can do online that before COVID the federal government made us go to an office and do in person, right? Where we could just submit these documents online. Now we're able to do some of this stuff online. Like I have to renew my passport. I can do the whole thing online. The last time I renewed my passport, I had to walk myself to the post office and make an appointment and take my documents in person. Now I can just do it online, right?
Yeah.
That's one of the good things that came out of COVID. The other good thing is the realization to how amazing medics are. Like I feel like I've been like ripping my shirt and screaming like a crazy person, like, why are we not utilizing medics? Why are we forcing them to be techs in the ER when they're capable of so much more? And now that like these scopes of medics in the hospital is expanding. Like don't get on Facebook very often anymore, but I got on yesterday and I saw somebody had reposted something from the IBSC, and they are contemplating or they are looking at the viability of creating a certification for in-hospital medics. And so I'm hopeful that all of these things will advance paramedicine, because I have seen how amazing paramedics are. I have seen how there is a skill set that you have as a paramedic that I don't have as a nurse. And that's one reason that I love the paramedic nurse combination, right? Paramedics, and I see this as an instructor as well. When I'm teaching them, I can tell immediately who's a nurse, who's a medic, and who's both. Paramedics are taught algorithmically. You guys are built for speed. Immediately recognize a life threat and intervene quickly. But you guys don't think holistically and you don't think down the line. You guys think 15 to 30 minutes at a time. Mm-hmm. So you guys were taught algorithms. You guys have stuff memorized out the wazoo. If this rhythm, then that treatment. If this, then 300 of amio. If this, then Thor's lunchbox and you shock the person. It's algorithms. If this, then that. Whereas nurses, we had to do these things. And if you're listening to this and you're a nurse, I need you to just like take a deep breath. I'm about to say something that's going to trigger you. Care plans. We had to do these things in nursing school called care plans. And we all complained about it and whined in nursing school like, I'm not learning anything from these nursing plans. And we whined and complained and how much work it is. And these are boring. But I did it too. I complained about it. But now that I function at the critical care level and I teach, I see how care plans created me to be a critical thinker, right? And so I know as a nurse that like, if we have to RSI someone, I'm going to leave the endotracheal tube in the package as long as possible. Whereas my medic partners tend to get it out of the package and lay it on the patient's chest or next to the patient, get it out, right? Because they're going for speed. But I'm thinking, you just intubated a patient and there was a blade of grass on that endotracheal tube. And now there's a 1 billion% chance that patient is going to have ventilator-associated pneumonia. Couple that with the multi-systems trauma that we are tubing them for in this ditch right here on the side of the highway. They're definitely going to have ARDS, right? And so the way nurses are trained, we're trained to think holistically, but we're so much slower. We got to stop and think about it. And honestly, we're used to in the hospital, we got to go ask a doctor first. Whereas the medic, you done did the thing that needs to be done.
Yeah.
Right. So you guys feed decisiveness, confidence, autonomy to the table, but nurses bring holistic thinking and let's be proactive and prevent something from developing down the road. And so when you put those two together, which is how we do HEMS for the most part here in the United States, there's a couple of programs that run provider nurse or provider medic, but most of our HEMS programs here in the United States do nurse medic combo. That's why I think it's such a beautiful combination is my paramedic partners, they can make a decision a lot faster than I can. Whereas I got to twiddle my thumbs and think about it for a second and go, are we sure? They've already got the crap out and they're ready to start the procedure.
Yeah. Just for people who are listening that don't know what that means, it's helicopter in EMS that is specific to helicopter, but flight does involve both the helicopter and fixed wing. It just depends on the company that you work with. You could work both, you could work one or the other.
All that to say, to bring it back to your original question, is that there's absolutely some utility for paramedics in the ICU. And I see them popping up. They're in the ER pretty much. That's pretty much standard now.
Yeah.
Medics in the ER. Realize that. But it's starting to creep into some of the other units of the floors or the ICUs that like medics are actually really smart, right? And very useful. And so I guess the solution is go get a job as a tech in the ICU if you really just want the clinical experience. And people are going to see how amazing you are and how much utility there is. And maybe you could convince them to create a role for paramedics in the ICU that have a larger scope than the techs, but maybe not quite what the nurses are doing.
Sure. And I think that's a phenomenal suggestion. I think that could be hard in justifying, right? Like if I'm going to go out and get a part-time job, why am I going to get paid significantly less than what I'm getting paid right now if I can just pick up an overtime shift? But I could see how that would be beneficial to our positions, right? To as paramedics for our positions to moving up and progressing. And I agree with you. I think we are being realized as a higher competency than people initially thought. We don't all just drive the boo-boo bus. We do take some education, but I do think that's a great suggestion. And I also think that I was laughing so hard at you because you talked about the tube coming out and being put on somebody's chest versus staying in the plastic. And I like literally was just talking about Tyler's YouTube earlier, Foam Frat, and that was part of that conversation was, are we really saving them from that much infection if we're leaving it in the plastic versus taking it out and shoving it in? You know what I mean? So that it was funny that you brought that up.
What was the consensus? I need to hear what the pulmonologist said. Please validate me.
You might listen to it. Again, it was just a quick listen for me on my side. It was about an hour long, and he said that it didn't really matter.
I'm open to the idea of being wrong, so maybe I'll stop dying on that hill.
I'll send you the link just so you can double check and make sure that I'm not like maybe I heard it wrong. I was doing other things while I was also listening. Who knows? I'll send you the link though. I know you're super busy. So I had a listener request. Her name is Michelle. She's the host of the Conversing Nurse podcast. She wanted to know what happens if you have a bathroom emergency in a helicopter. So I was able to answer her from a fixed wing position where if you have that if you have a bathroom emergency in a fixed wing, most of the airplanes carry a little bucket for fuel testing. That's what you get.
Mm-hmm.
You can put a sheet up and hopefully your pilots are nice enough to land. If not, you're in the plane for either 30 minutes to multiple hours, depending on where you're flying from. And not only does that person suffer, but the whole team suffers, right? Because you can't just evacuate that air from the airplane. It's stuck in there.
Sure. Yeah, what a fun question. I love it when people ask me the unusual or the curious questions that probably everybody wonders and nobody's brave enough to ask it. So first of all, kudos to Michelle for asking that question. Usually it's, what do you wear under your flight suit?
Yeah.
Right. That's usually the curious question. So I have learned the hard way that you keep an empty bladder, right? And we take the 45 seconds it takes to go pee before when tones drop. it's worth it. Like there have been times where I'm like, ooh, I kind of have to pee, but I can probably wait the hour and a half that this is going to take, right? Because if you're flying a scene flight, those are really quick, right? We take off. And with helicopter, we stay in a pretty small radius, whereas you in the airplane, you could go across the entire country,
Hmm.
right? You go longer distances. And so, like the longest flight that my flight service does, if we have a headwind, for me to go to St. Louis, it's about an hour and a half. And that's going to be on an interfacility transfer. So I'm knowing that that's happening ahead of time. So I can hit the bathroom. Um, okay, maybe this is TMI, but you asked, so we're gonna go there. Okay. Anyone who's ever heard me teach knows that I love all things bathroom humor. So I have two groups of best friends, and one of them, we are all bound together by our chronic GI issues. As a matter of fact, our group chat on my phone is called the Diarrhea Hotties because only hot girls get diarrhea. I need everybody to know that, okay? Only hot. If you have diarrhea, congratulations, you're a hot girl. Because
Oh,
only hot.
that goes to everybody.
Yeah. But I have decades of experience in clenching my butthole, and I'm just gotten really good at it. And so I might be sweating by the time we get somewhere. And I might say to my partner, as soon as we drop this patient off, I will be running, not walking. I will be running to the nearest restroom. And I know myself well enough to know that I don't eat black beans the day before a flight shift. Okay. I'm not going to do that to my partner. It's okay to laugh.
Okay.
I know that I don't eat Qdoba on a flight shift. I just have to be careful because I know me and no one is more destructive to me than me. And so I do know one of my best girls who's in my Diarrhea Hotties group chat. They're gonna murder me. One of them, it wasn't her, it was someone that she knows experienced a bathroom emergency on the helicopter and did have a poopsie into the suction canister. And I can't imagine anything worse. I have a pilot. I used to have a pilot. He was with my first flight program. So approach plates, if you're unfamiliar with aviation, approach plates, now they're on an iPad. They used to be in a really thick book, and they would come out with a new version of it like once every 2 or 3 months because airports change, right?
All
They
the
rebuild
time.
runways.
Yeah.
Right. So if we have an in-flight emergency and our pilot needs help knowing where to land, if we go double IMC, which means we get caught in the clouds and we can no longer see the ground, we pull out these books and we called them pubs, right? They were the published approach plates. And so I could tell them, okay, your minimum safe altitude is 3,200 MSL. We need to climb to this altitude and we'll catch the approach and, our autopilot can take us in. But one of my pilots once had a bathroom emergency while in flight and they landed in a field and he wiped with pubs. He had to rip out the pages and hang his ass over the skid and paint the side of the aircraft and use the pumps. You just gotta do what you gotta do
You
sometimes.
do. You do have to. So, like, in my circumstance, it was one of my friends, and our team had flown out to, I don't remember if it was Alabama or Georgia, but they ate lunch there because why not? You're going to take the opportunity when you're several states away to eat, the local food.
Yeah.
Yeah, that didn't end well for him. It actually only lasted about half an hour to an hour before he got to a point where he couldn't stop it from coming, right? So he was poor guy. He was throwing up and he was shitting in the bucket
Oh,
in the back of the airplane. And they had like a 4 hour flight time, like just terrible. I told him if it was me, I would have made the pilots land and we'd be staying the night until the next day. Like, sorry, everybody, you're getting paid on my pooper. It's like there's nothing I can do, right? So
oh my gosh.
I saw this meme the other day and I totally agreed to it, but like, are you even adult if you haven't shit your pants yet, right? Like you're not living life until you know that feeling of shitting your pants. Like one of my best friends messaged me like 6 or 7 months ago. He was like, I went on a walk with my dog today and I was like, oh, that's fantastic. How was the walk? He was like, well, I got about halfway and shit my pants and had to walk back the other mile and a half to get home because there was nothing he could do about it. You know what I mean? It's like, are you even living your life?
There are two kinds of people in the world, those who shit their pants and those who lie about shitting their pants.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
So the one of the other girls in the diarrhea hotties chat, I'm going to be really careful not to identify her, but she's a nurse in the hospital and she was in the middle of a cardiac arrest like
Oh
6 months
no.
or so. And she was the scribe. That's the nurse who stands in the corner out of the way and records everything that's happening. You a pulse check, epi's given, and keeps the time going. And she was stuck behind the crash cart, and she's in the diarrhea hotties chat, so she's one of us, right? She's
Yep.
the fight the battle, and she did not make it. And she texted us, and she's like,
Oh
"Someone's
no.
bringing me OR scrubs and hospital panties." And it's funny because it's happened to all of us at one time or another.
Yes. Oh.
Oh my gosh. Florence Nightingale is sitting in her grave right now.
I love this conversation so much already. That is fantastic.
I have never shipped my flight suit though. It's been close.
It's been close. I haven't shit in my flight suit either. Who knows? So you never know. One day it might happen. Hopefully not, but you never know because you talked about your rotor times being like fairly short, about an hour. Some of our rotor teams out here in the entire state can fly 2.5, 3, 4 hours, depending on where they're going.
Oh
That's
gosh.
hot if you don't have an air conditioner. Oh, that's terrible. I couldn't even imagine. Like fixed wing, in that amount of time, at least I'm in a more comfortable chair. It's still uncomfortable. You're in a kind of tiny chair. You can't stand up. You can't move around. It's a tight space. Not as tight as a helicopter, but still.
Yeah, for sure. That's a long rotor time.
That is a long road. I couldn't imagine. Yeah.
The vibration. Oof.
Yep. So do you keep your ER job as, I know you said that you get a lot of clinical experience because you're hospital based, but why do you keep another ER job?
Yeah, sure. That's a good question. So I have four jobs if you count Nurse Gwenny as a job.
Jesus.
So my full-time job is that I teach for Impact EMS full time. But for me to be able to be competent in this job, I don't ever want to teach without doing the thing that I'm teaching. So I fly PRN, but because I fly PRN, they want me to have another clinical job that keeps me clinically competent. So I have to have my ER job to keep my flight job. I have to have my flight job to keep my education job, but I really enjoy all of it. Even if I didn't have these requirements on me, it still wouldn't change anything. I don't have enough time. I can't afford the time for all of these jobs, but I have a really great support system at home. So my husband is also my business manager for Nurse Gwenny, and so he takes care of all the shipping of my books when people order, and he looks at over at all my contracts that I sign for podcasts or whatever things we're working on. He takes care of a lot. He's Mr. Mom with five kids by himself. Like this Friday, I have a clinical shift at the hospital and he'll have all five of our kids together by himself, and he is an incredible human being, so it's doable for me. I understand that it's not doable for everybody, but I really love teaching. I love seeing it click for people when they're like, oh, that totally makes sense why we clamp an ET tube or why we give albuterol and crush injuries. I love seeing those aha moments. I love teaching in my style because I think it resonates with people, particularly those who maybe have ADHD and our minds are just very, very busy, right? So I love that. I love flying because who wouldn't? Like, that's the coolest job ever. Like, who gets to get in a helicopter or an airplane at work? Like, so freaking cool. And every patient I take care of is really sick. So every patient is a challenge. I really enjoy a challenge. I enjoy learning. I enjoy having to stretch my own limits to take care of a patient, right? And it's like solving a puzzle. But I also love the ER. The ER was my first love. That was my first job out of nursing school, and I love the fast pace. It does allow me an avenue to use what some may see as a weakness, as my brain is all over the place, right? Right away, you picked up on that. You're like, oh, do you have ADHD? I'm like, I don't think so. But in the ER, it works for me.
It
I can
does.
handle a super sick patient over here and a maybe not so sick patient, but they're more emotionally needy over here. And I've got a new grad that's in the pod with me, and she might need a little bit of help. Bouncing back and forth from all of those tasks and keeping all those plates spinning, that's fun for me. It's fun.
Yeah, you live and strive in that chaos for sure.
Yes, it's getting harder on me as I get older. So I'll be 40 next year and I can feel it like on my body and,
You look
and like
amazing.
thank you. My son is 16. So yeah,
Oh my goodness.
I feel like a big old lady. But yeah, it gets harder on me. When you were talking about rotor times, I was like, oh, my spine could never handle
Yeah, I
that.
know. That and that's what I've heard. Like it's really hard on your back. But there is a very strong belief that if you strive in this type of environment, being the emergency environment, right, or in helicopter or critical care, that you have a lot of past trauma. Would you say that's true for you personally? Did you come up with a lot of trauma and now this is how you live because this is how you know how to live, or is just this something that you fell into?
Yeah, that's a really nuanced and complex question. So I think any of us who've been in EMS for very long see this cycle that most people, I don't want to say all, most people that work in EMS for any amount of time will go through at some point. It is chaotic, and some people manage the chaos really well, and some people are swallowed by the chaos. Some people become the chaos, right? How many of your colleagues do you know? This is rhetorical, please don't answer. Are alcoholics who struggle with drug abuse, who divert medications, who bounce from job to job to job to job because they can't ever maintain peace, can't ever settle in somewhere, who are on their third marriage, who can't hold a relationship. How many colleagues do we know who haven't at least had a season of that? And boy, did I have a season of that. And I'm so thankful that that didn't become the forever version of Gwenny. I was able to heal through that. And I really like the way life is right now. I listened to one of Ginger Locke's episodes of her podcast a couple of years ago, where she and her significant other and were on there, and her significant other is in EMS, if I remember this correctly. And then she interviewed a gentleman who was a flight paramedic, and his wife uh, is not in medicine. And so when Ginger was interviewing from both perspectives, okay, what it's like for you to have a spouse that is in EMS, what is it like for you to have a spouse that's not in EMS? And they were talking about that. And like an aha moment where I felt like time slowed down as I was listening to what Ginger said. She said sometimes people who are in EMS only know how to live in chaos. And so at home, in their relationships, off the job, they will create chaos because that's the only thing they know how to manage. They're phenomenal. On an MCI scene, they can triage, they can run that thing like smooth like butter. But at home, they don't know how to deal with peace. And so they create chaos so that they can be in control of the chaos. And I was in a really unhealthy relationship at that point in time. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, that's him. That's my significant other. He's creating chaos because that's all he knows how to manage. And it was such like an aha moment for me. And then I had to look at myself and say, are there times when I do this? Do I create chaos because I thrive in being able to manage the chaos? And for me, it's not chaos. For me, it's busyness. Sometimes I can create excessive busyness that mocks the sensation of a critical patient in bed 2, an emotionally needy patient in bed 3, a nurse over here that needs my help, ambulance coming into bed 4. Like I create that much busyness because I'm really good at keeping the plates spinning. And so perhaps the greatest work I have done in my career is not the books I have written or the students I have taught or the people I have mentored, but in learning how to rest in peace. And that's something that my husband has taught me. He's not in EMS, he's not in healthcare. Like you say the word blood and he's having a syncopal episode. He can't do it.
Oh,
He runs a landscaping company. And so what he does for sometimes 6, 8 hours a day is put noise canceling headphones on while he hops on a mower and he thinks and he's at peace with himself. And that's something that he has taught me, that even before I met him, I was doing the work. I recognized in my work with my therapist that I had to figure out how to be at peace and not be super busy, right? And then my husband, Josh, has really helped me to get there, to really put the polishing touches on being at peace, not having to create chaos, not having to create busyness. And so that has been my biggest struggle. I, thank goodness, have never struggled with drugs or alcohol or things like addictions, chemical addictions, but busyness was my addiction.
Yeah.
And I feel really grateful to be on the other side of that. And if I can teach people why you clamp an ET tube or why you give albuterol in a crush injury, I hope that I can also teach people how to break that cycle and not let the chaos consume them, not let the sounds of lights and sirens, not let the sympathetic surge that we thrive in, not let that consume their whole lives.
I think you got in the wrong business, dude. You should have been a therapist because holy smokes, that was beautifully put. Like, seriously, I can, like, you say that, and I can think of so many people that do that, including myself at one point in time. I agree. When I was working all the overtime that I needed to work in order to function and to live, like, that was my life, was creating this busy, whirlwind, hectic life. And it's easy to get caught up in that.
Yep.
It's really easy to get caught up on that. But to step back and to do the things that you want to do and not say, well, I need to work the two extra. I'll use this as an example. For my birthday this last year, I bought myself a whole like fishing kit, like this, all of this awesome, cool fishing gear. And I've never gone fishing before in my whole life, but it was something I wanted to do. And it was nice to not say, well, I need to work two extra overtimes just to get that really, really expensive fishing pole that I want. You know what I mean? And just to say, I'll take what I can get, what I can afford right now, what I can get. And it's a whole other level of maturity for somebody in healthcare. How many times have you picked up overtime because you want to pay for that vacation? You know what I mean? And then you pick up overtime and you pick up another overtime because you're like, well, I really want to get this bag, or I really want to get this really awesome Christmas present, or whatever. And we just get caught in this loop. So it was so beautifully put the way that you said it. And thank you for sharing that. That's amazing.
Yeah, thank you. I measure things not in US dollars, but in the number of overtime shifts that it costs. And that's how I weigh the cost of something. Okay, this is going to cost me a half of an incentive shift. Is it worth it? Nope, it's not worth taking me away from my family for 6 hours to go pay for it. So I'm glad that you also think in
Yeah.
hours of overtime.
It is common, I think. It's a common thing amongst healthcare professionals to think that way.
Yeah.
So you had talked about how you work one job in order to function at another job, and that requires you to have another job. Right now, with the business that you have built up from what used to be IA Med and is now Impact, right? By the way, great classes, love them.
Thank
Um,
you.
could you live on just the business that you've made for yourself?
So Impact isn't my business. I was just hired into it. It was started back in 2011 by a couple of other folks who are no longer with the organization as it has grown and sold. But with that being my full-time job, yes, I could live on that. My ultimate goal is for Nurse Gwenny to be my full-time income at some point in time, but I think that's years down the road.
Sure.
You got to get accreditation and an LMS and all of that. That takes time, especially with the time that I can dedicate that comes not just secondary to other things, but like tertiary or quaternary to all of these other jobs and my home life, and then whatever's left over, then I can develop it into Nurse Gwenny. So yes, I could live on that. I would have to live more carefully, because the extra income I get from the extra jobs allow me to live a little bit more footloose and fancy free. That like, if I don't want to cook dinner tonight, okay, last night we call it Crapper Barrel, Cracker Barrel. We went to Crapper Barrel because we can.
just
And
just
so yes,
because.
yeah, I don't want to cook dinner and do dishes. We'll go to Crapper Barrel before we go to the wrestling meet to watch my son. So yes, I absolutely could. I also think that that's something that EMS doesn't do well is understand financial management. Like, I don't know how to invest. Like, that's another thing my husband is just really good at. He's so good at many, many things. But one of the things is like investment. And as after we got married, and he was like, okay, what retirement accounts do you have where? And I was like, I think I have one here. I don't know, like maybe one over there. He's like, what are you doing with it? I'm like, I don't know, whatever my guy at Edward Jones says to do. And he's like, oh my gosh, like nobody ever taught us this. Like
No.
no, nobody ever talks about this. And so, especially during COVID, when we had the ability to work contracts and make, big money to invest in our own futures, we haven't really been taught how to do that because it's so easy for us to just say, I'll just pick up an overtime shift
Yes.
instead, managing my money well. So that could be an area. Maybe you should have like a financial expert on the podcast to teach us all how to do that sometime.
I already did.
Oh, okay, send me the
I
episode.
will. She actually just started her own podcast. I'll send you the link.
Oh, cool.
Yes,
Yeah,
Chris
cool.
was her
Thanks.
name, and I interviewed her. And she's a financial coach who helps specifically with first responders and healthcare to help people manage, because that is something we've talked about. Why are there so many old people in healthcare? Well, it's because we're not taught how to properly manage our retirements, and we're not all government based, so we don't have that 20 years of service and you automatically get retirement like some fire departments do. A lot of us are third party. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'll send you her link. I'll post it in the podcast also. So, what would you say has been like your proudest achievement in your time of service?
Oh, goodness. I don't know that I could pin it to one singular moment. I think I may have to reference back to the learning to be at peace within myself has made me a better nurse. It has made me a better teammate to my medic partners. It has made me a better nurse in the emergency department to be at peace within myself and not need the addiction to chaos and busyness to function. So I think the personal growth that I put in outside of the job has been the best thing that I have done for my career. And when people, either in a podcast interview or just, talking to people in my capacity as Nurse Gwenny, they'll say, I love how passionate you are about nursing, or I love how passionate you are about EMS or education. I always stop people. Look, I'm a people pleaser and I don't like conflict,
Mhm.
but I will stop people in that moment because it's so meaningful to me. I always say, I don't mean to step on your toes. I don't want to burst your bubble, but I'm not passionate about nursing. I'm not passionate about EMS. I'm not passionate about education. 5 years ago, absolutely, that was my only passion. Now, I like all of those things. I love the work that I get to do. I feel very fortunate that I get to have a really cool job that lets me support people on their hardest day. But I'm not passionate about those things. I'm passionate about being a really supportive wife. I'm passionate about loving all five of my kids and seeing them all individually and recognizing their needs and meeting those. And passionate about showing up at the wrestling meets, the gymnastics meets, the whatever the events are, and supporting my kids. I'm passionate about my life outside of work. And I think that that concept, if maybe we could make that the norm, if we could make everybody passionate about who they are outside of the job, we would have a lot more job satisfaction and perhaps lower rates of PTSD, depression, anxiety. Perhaps we would have lower rates of that stuff if we invested in ourselves as human beings more than we invested in ourselves as nurses or paramedics. Like, I was so thrilled when you just told me the story of buying yourself a fishing pole for your birthday. And you said, I've never fished a day in my life, but I'm going to try. I wrote it down as a note over here to commend you on developing a hobby. Because how many people do you know that their car is covered with the Star of Life and they have EMS or firefighter license plates, and every t-shirt in their wardrobe is something to do with EMS, and they've got the EKG and the Star of Life tattoos, and their whole life is consumed. I don't mean to shame anybody who has any
No,
of
no
those
shame
things.
at all. I am one of those
It's
people.
Yeah, it's not about those items. It's about the mentality that says my whole life has to be about my job. Because at the end of the day, like a lesson that I learned the really hard way was your job will be posted before the grass is grown over your grave.
Is absolutely true.
When I left my first flight job, it was under some really terrible conditions. I had attempted to take my own life because I had I had gotten caught up in that cycle of the addiction to busyness because of the chaos that was happening at work, and I had an abuser at work that I couldn't get help with at work, and I was working so much that it took a toll on my home life. And so I was going through a divorce after a 14-year marriage. It was taking a toll on my health, and I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer and had surgery and signed out from PACU AMA and went home with a JP drain still in, pulled it the next morning, put a band-aid over it, and went back to work. Like, that's how addicted to the work I was. And so many things were going wrong, and it culminated in me attempting to take my own life. And once I was physically better a few weeks later, I realized that, like, I can't stay here. I can't get well if I am being in chaos 100 to 120 hours a week, because at the time that's how much I was working. And so when I left there, my job was posted by the end of that business day, whereas I'm still trying to pick up the pieces of my life. My boss didn't give a shit about who I was as a human being. He just said, "Oh shit, I lost my best overtime worker." He didn't care about who I was as a person. And it shattered. It was like it was insult to injury. It was salt in my very deep wounds of, we only cared about what you could do for us, not about who you were. And I'm an empath. I'm an Enneagram type 2. If you don't know your Enneagram type, I encourage you to take a test online and learn your Enneagram type. I've never felt so seen until I read the description of an Enneagram 2. But I'm an empath, so I feel things really deeply, which is both a blessing and a curse. It allows me to connect with patients or with other people, but I also feel things really deeply. And that was so harmful to me as an individual that it reinforced that narrative that I had running in my head, that you are only as good as your productivity.
Yes. Oh, that's so accurate.
Yes. And so there began, that was day one. I can usually tell this story without crying, but I am having to work real hard right
Girl, you
now to
do.
keep myself
I'll be right
together.
here with you, my friend. I'm right here with you.
That was day one of learning who the hell is Gwenny, the human being, the mom. Who is that person? Because I had staked so much of my work in who I am as Gwenny the nurse. And so to fight that, to just like alcoholics fight every single day not to take a drink of alcohol, I fight every single day to maintain my legacy, to maintain my passion in who I am as a human being, and fight the urge to not stake my value in how good of a nurse I am. Can I publish a new book? Can I work this many overtime hours? Can I solve this clinical puzzle? Those are all good things. I'm not saying those are bad things. It's good to have career ambitions. It's good to want to be good at your job, but not to the degree that it destroys who you are as a human. And that's the most important lesson I could ever share with people. And if I, by sharing my story or by mentoring younger people in the industry, if I can save them from becoming who I was circa 2000, okay, maybe that's worth it, that I went through all of that to keep maybe these few other people.
Holy shit, Gwenny. Jesus. I two things. First, I did hear you slightly hesitate when you talked about how bad it got and wanting to take your life. So I want to say thank you so much for sharing that, for feeling comfortable in sharing that, because I want this to be a safe place. And I can't say how many times how grateful I am for people to come on and share their experiences, right? Like, this is amazing and this is what we're going for. And I'm not trying to like blow your life out of proportion. I just want people to understand what we're going through. And, most of the time when I finish up the episodes, people are like, this was amazing. I feel like I sat through therapy. I feel like I'm sitting through therapy right now listening to you talk. So that is amazing. I am so, so proud of you. And I'm so proud of where you are, how far you've come. The whole person that you are sitting in front of me is absolutely phenomenal. And we had talked a little bit before the show. I had asked you if you had listened, and you told me yes, it was the episode that I had sent you. And I sent you Lindsay's episode. And I think the title of Lindsay's episode is so fitting for this conversation right now. Do you remember what it is?
Human first, clinician second, or something
Human
like that.
first, clinician second. Yes, it is so hard to teach people, please put yourself first. Please put yourself first. And the fact that you said that you were about to commend me for buying a fishing pole, my wife wouldn't commend me. I've had too many too many hobbies in the last few years because I do just keep trying things. I go metal detecting, I go gold panning, I collect coins. Now I'm doing fishing and podcasting and all of these things, but I can do this and I can figure out what I really want to do because I have taken that step back from working all of the overtime hours, from putting myself in that position where I'm just getting to that point where ultimately it is going to come to a peak and two things are going to happen. You know what I mean? I'm either going to put myself in a bad position or technically unalive myself, or I'm going to crumple. And what's worse? What's worse? I give in to the addictions or I kill myself. We need to stop putting these jobs before we put ourselves. And that's a hard realization for people. It is a very hard realization for people.
Yeah, it is. And not to chase a rabbit, but I think that there are many facets of that mentality that need to be discussed. You know, it's so hard for us in EMS and in healthcare, especially in emergency medicine, is that we are expected to be second. It's always the patient is to be first. Protect the patient at all costs. ER nurses, we get assaulted on a regular basis, worse depending on where you work, but you're expected to not file charges. Those if you do file charges, they rarely actually go through to seek justice because we're supposed to just take it, right? And I see it happen on the ambulance. I don't get on Facebook very much anymore. The last year or so has just worn me out on Facebook, but one of the contributing factors was every damn time I log in, it seemed like the first post, I'm not exaggerating, every time I logged in, the first post was about somebody else dying in a crash, not just in a helicopter, more often in ambulances. And it's part of this is we have to run blazing saddles to every call. And I get it that it's not just as simple as what I'm making it sound in this conversation. But we don't have to go lights and sirens to every call. But we should put on our seatbelts. And there's this expectation, put the patient first. So go as fast as you can and put yourself in danger. And don't wear your seatbelt so you can keep taking care of the patient. And I get it. I get it. I know I'm probably going to get 1 million nasty grams from people that are like, my county makes us run priority. I get it. I know. I know. But can we at least start having the conversation to like take care of yourself because you can't take care of patients anymore if you're dead in a ditch somewhere. So stop putting your job first and take care of who you are as a human, whether that is fostering hobbies, investing in yourself, going to therapy, spending time with your wife and kids, or whether that's putting yourself first on the job. And that means you might have a longer scene time to where you can care for that patient so that you can buckle up safely during the transport. Or it might mean that it takes 3.5 more minutes to get the patient to the hospital because you're not going to blast through every intersection. But I think we really need to start having that conversation, and it needs to be part of how we decide policies and procedures. And should we discuss putting limits on overtime? Because you talked about your past of kind of being addicted to the overtime. I wasn't exaggerating. During my kind of year of implosion, I was working 100 to 125 hours per week. I'm not talking about per pay, I'm saying per week. And that's not healthy. And how many times have you seen it? We're so good. We think like no one knows I'm imploding. Really,
Yeah.
everyone sees it. Everyone sees it.
Yes.
You think you're hiding it, you're not.
Yeah.
How many times have you seen it in a colleague or maybe someone who you just kind of know from a distance and you see them working 100 hours? What's the first thing you think of when you see someone picking up all the overtime? You're like, ooh, things are bad at home.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
things are bad at home.
My calendar used to make it in every new hire orientation. They would show my calendar to the people coming in, and it was like every day. I'd have like 4 days off a month because I was working so much overtime. And then they had annual, this person got the most IVs, this person got the most intubations, this person drove the most miles or whatever. And it was always me. Like it stopped being fun after the third year because it was it was always me as the top, you know what I mean? And that's how it was bad, and I look back now, and I've talked about this before. I look back now and I'm like, what was I doing to myself? That was not worth it. I can't remember the majority of my 20s, because I was working so much overtime. And I feel so much more whole, and I want other people to feel like that too. And you just have such a beautiful way of putting it. Like, I'm so glad that you're an educator and that you get to go out and talk to as many people as you do, because you get to share this. That is amazing. It is amazing that you have this awesome voice and an awesome platform to get all of this out.
Thank you. Sam, can I ask you, do you wish someone would have stepped in and stopped you? Do you wish someone would have saved you from yourself during your 20s when you were working all that
I'll be
overtime?
honest, it would have been hard. It would have been hard to force me to stop, but that's the extent that it would have been to. You can force me to stop, and if they would have stopped me at my job, I would have just gone and gotten another job. It wasn't unheard of for me to have 3 or 4 jobs at a time because I was addicted to that, and I do recognize that, where you think like you need that. You think that you need that amount of money just to survive, but you don't.
So, what's the solution? What do you think when people who are working like you were or who were struggling like I was and masking it with all the overtime, what do people do?
I think that if companies put caps on the amount of overtime that a person can work, I think that that would help significantly, right? When I was going through, there was no cap. There was pick up as much overtime as you want. I know that after I left, they made a rule that like you could only work either so many days in a row or so many hours in a row. I don't remember what it is, but I think that that would help significantly. But I think also getting a hold of a financial coach. I think that's huge. Having somebody to help you be an adult as much as we are adults, taking care of your money is helping significantly. Like you said, that your husband does a lot of that stuff, right? I didn't have that growing up. I didn't have that until I met my wife, and she helps a lot with the finance. She's very smart when it comes to that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? So I didn't have that background. I think that for other people, if you don't have that background, recognition is key, and then getting that help is second.
Mhm. Yeah. I think also helping people to get physically healthy.
Mm-hmm.
I think having the availability to work out on shift between calls, whether it's a ground service and air service, whatever, whether that means have a stationary bike or a treadmill, or, I mean, you don't need expensive equipment. I mean, hell, have a yoga class 3 times a week around the time of shift change. That way, people who are getting off or people who are before they come on could do a yoga class. Like, I think offering physical health benefits could improve kind of the culture within our industry.
Oh, I
I think
agree.
I don't know what all the answers are, Sam,
No.
but I can see what some of the problems are, and maybe if you and I can start a conversation about maybe somebody who's a little bit smarter than us can come along
Yes.
and figure out what the correct answer is.
I would hope that that would happen one day. One day it may, but I think that people are just too complex. And what might help you might not help me. And what might help me might not help the next person. But through a variety of people and through a variety of interviews, maybe we can just hit some small target audiences to help fix that problem.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right.
So, to go back a little bit, You had talked about how hard it was because you were living in that chaos and you were having a really hard time. Were you also seeing really bad patients or running very bad calls at that time? Or did you ever
Not any worse.
not any worse? Okay.
Not any
Yeah.
worse than normal. So the only clinical really terrible thing that would happen. I have to be really careful about how and where I share this story because it is really uh, I don't know how to describe it. I just have to protect where I share it. But I do volunteer work in a developing nation, and I was kind of at the very beginning of when things started to crumble. I was in this other country for 2 weeks working, and in a 2 week time period, I took care of the only survivor of a terrorist attack in this particular country who had horrific injuries. I was held at gunpoint 3 separate times in 2 weeks and nearly kidnapped the last time. It is a miracle that I wasn't kidnapped and killed. Americans are routinely kidnapped and killed in this particular country. Um, and I had, there was one day where we had been traveling for several hours. What should have been a 30, 40-minute drive took us 2.5 hours because we were trying to avoid gang controlled parts of this country to go meet another relief worker who had a 12-year-old girl in his care, and he needed her to get to the city where I had been working. And so we took an ambulance and we were trying to get to him to meet him, and we were stopped by the gangs and they had a gun on my driver. And I know that ambulance driver is like really derogatory here in the US, but in this particular country, it's the driver is just that. The driver, I have a driver, an EMT, and then ALS provider in the back. And it was a physician and I in the back together. They pulled the driver out of the truck and had a gun on his head, not just pointed, it was physically pressed into his temple. I looked out the front window of the ambulance, and there was another gang member with a gun on my EMT's head, and my EMT had both hands up in the air, like you would see on television, someone being held at gunpoint. And then there were multiple other people at the front of the ambulance pointing their guns straight down the ambulance toward where I and the physician were in the back. And the back doors opened to the ambulance, and that's where my driver is with the gun pressed to his head, and he's following the commands of the gang leader. I don't speak fluently the language there. I can understand a few words here and there, but I could understand when he kept saying white woman. And I could tell by the inflections in his voice, he was asking questions about the white woman. And I started to panic on the inside and was thinking, I know the general area of where we are. I know that I'm probably 2 miles from the ocean. And I know that if I get in the ocean and swim left, I know that will take me back to the city where there's a US embassy and I can get some help. Like I was trying to think of how am I going to get out of this situation if he kidnaps me? Like he's so much stronger than me. There's no way I can outrun him or fight him. But it was that, and that was the third time in 2 weeks that I'd been held at gunpoint. But that was uh, the most dangerous time. That was the time I really thought I was going to be killed. And it was terrifying. And my driver in that instance was as cool as a cucumber. I will never forget how cool and collected he was in that moment. And he broke his language and made eye contact with me sitting in the back of the ambulance and said, Gwenny, he will not take you. He will not take you without killing me first. You are safe with me. And so my watch, my Garmin alerted me that my heart rate was outside of normal range. It was 158. And I thought, no shit, no shit, my heart rate's 158. And the doctor that was with me had gone completely catatonic, like lights were on, but nobody was home. And that was how his brain was dealing with that moment. He was just frozen. And my driver eventually, which later he explained to me in English, he said, I told him that nobody cared about you and that nobody would pay your ransom back home. And we kind of laughed about it in the moment. But in reality, that's kind of what was happening,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I was estranged from my parents. I was in the middle of a messy divorce. And I thought, oh, little does he know that's actually true. But
Oh.
that's how he convinced the gunman not to take me, was that there was no ransom to be collected on me. No one would pay it. And he let us go. And he got back in the ambulance and he's still cool as a cucumber and he starts driving away. And I'm like in the back, like in a full shake because I was in a sympathetic, not just surge, but absolute glugging of epinephrine into my body, of my adrenals going panic. My amygdala is like extreme danger. And we start driving away, and I'm like, what the fuck just happened? And he's like, he wanted you. He wanted to take you. And we're driving away, and he's like shouting, like, through the hole between the box and the truck. And we're driving, and I'm trying to talk to my doctor, and he's still just like, lights are on, nobody's home. He's totally gone. And I'm like, hey, like, are you okay? Like, what I couldn't even make words, right? And then, like, maybe 30 to 60 seconds later, the ambulance stops again, and my heart sank. And I thought, no, he's back. He's back, and he's going to take me this time. What the fuck are we going to do? So I'm like bracing myself to like throw hands when the back doors open again. And when the back doors open, it's the American nurse holding this lifeless child who was 2 weeks younger than my child, back safely at home in America. And he has no idea what we had just been through, right? We hadn't even processed it ourselves, let alone had time to call anyone to tell them. And he hands me this unresponsive little girl, and I put her down on the cot. My doctor is still totally catatonic. I'm putting her on the monitor. The heart rate picks up. The SpO2 won't pick up anything. I think it's just because we have a life pack 5. My brain doesn't think it's because her sat is so low it can't read it, right? Because literally we have a life pack 5 where I work there. And I couldn't go back from fighting for my life to now fighting for this patient's life. I was really having a hard time making that transition. And the place where we had stopped, there were kind of some street vendors and people selling things, and they saw white foreigners and they're like, ooh, opportunity for money. And so they come over trying to sell us sodas. And I knew I had the currency from that country in my pocket. And I pull some out and I hand it to my driver and I said, get me a Coke, get the parents of this little girl whatever she wants, get Andrew, the nurse, anything he wants, get everything. Somebody, we need something cold to drink to reset us. And I hadn't yet realized how sick this girl was in front of me. And I'm giving my driver instructions. I'm standing over the patient on the cot, still trying to figure out why the SpO2 won't pick up. She's like batting at the nasal cannula that I have on her. And I'm thinking, like, okay, this is good. If she's pissed off enough to be mad about her nasal cannula, she's at least perfusing and oxygenating well enough to have some fight in her. And as I'm looking out the back of the ambulance, giving these instructions to like, get me a Coke, get them a Coke, we need a reset here. The American nurse who's standing outside the ambulance says, Gwenny, is she still breathing? And womp, I turn back and look at her face and I see her pupils blow right in front of me, just both of them, just womp. And I was like, oh, fuck. I feel for a pulse, nothing. So I start compressions, and that was the final straw for me when the dam broke. And I'm sobbing and I'm providing compressions for this little girl. I remember everything about her still, and this has been years. And I'm shouting at the doctor, shouting his name. I need you to snap out of it and intubate this girl. And it was like he came back to me, like he just snapped out of it. He said, okay. And he gathers all of his airway supplies. I'm doing compressions. Thank heaven she already had an IV. My EMT jumps in. He's diluting epi so that we can give her doses that are appropriate for her size. And we're working her. I'm just sobbing. Tears are dripping off. We didn't have an air conditioner. It was like 110, 120 in the back of the truck where we were working. It was just stupidly hot. And then I think I like slipped in a wet pile of something. And I was like, who the hell spilled Mountain Dew in the back of this truck? Like, I'm still doing compressions on this little girl, trying to do all of this stuff. Right. And maybe I do have ADHD. My brain's going in 20 different directions. And I follow the puddle, figuring out where the hell this is coming from. And I realize it's dripping off the side of the cot. She's lost all tone and she's lost bladder control on the cot. So we're working her. And eventually the physician says to the parents in their language, like, hey, we are hours from being back to the city where we can take her to a pediatric ICU. We are beating her heart for her. We are breathing for her. She is very, very sick. Do you want us to stop and you can take her home and bury her? Or do you want us to keep working here and have very little chances of this? And I actually thought of this the other day. I was reading my Bible and it talked about everybody has a day to be born and a day to die. And the dad very plainly and so confidently says, everybody has a day to be born and a day to die. And today is her day to die. We'll take her home. And it was devastating for me. So we call the code. I wrap her in a white blanket and I hand her to the dad. And he puts her in the SUV and they take off and they go toward home to bury her. And it fucked me up. I got outside the ambulance. My legs couldn't even stay underneath me. And I just crumpled to the ground and was sobbing and dry heaving. And my driver, who had just saved my life a half an hour before, picked me up under the armpits and stands me up and just held me. Just held me. And that was the start. That was the start of the year where I was consumed by work. I came back. I flew home the next day. That was my last full day in country. I flew home the next day and I went back to work the day after that, pretended like nothing ever happened. Didn't see a therapist, didn't process my trauma. I was taking 50 milligrams of Benadryl and 30 milligrams of melatonin every night to get 2 hours of sleep. I was working 100 to 125 hours a week. I was starting the process of getting a divorce. In the weeks after coming home, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. I'd been gaslighting myself and telling myself it was anxiety when I laid flat, and that was why I was orthopnic and couldn't breathe. It turned out I had a 6.5 centimeter tumor. Was enduring hell on earth at work and covered it all by being extremely productive at work. Um, but no, my patients at work during that time weren't any worse than what I had normally seen. I mean, working in EMS, like I feel like we see the worst of the worst because the super dead patients don't even make it to the hospital,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Um, so I was used to that. But in my mind, I mean, there's tough cases, but in the United States, if you're in some horrific car crash or if you're really, really sick and a helicopter comes to you, you have two highly trained clinicians in a $5 to $10 million aircraft with every piece of medical equipment available taking care of you. We're going to fly you to a level 1 trauma center within the golden hour. If you still don't make it, like it was it was unsurvivable. But what fucked me up the worst was that this was a 12-year-old child who started out with a simple pneumonia. But because she didn't have access to vaccines, because she didn't have access to a primary care physician to keep her well, because she didn't have access to adequate nutrition, that for the entire 12 years of her life, she every day was a fight for survival. And because I was in a gang controlled area where I couldn't quickly and safely transport this patient to a hospital that could have saved her life, she died. She died. But because my kids were born in an area where they've never wanted for anything. They have everything they could ever want or need. If they have pneumonia, one of my kids had pneumonia like a month and a half ago. We got her on some PO antibiotics. She was fine in 2 weeks, right? But that about clinical situations tend not to mess with me too much here in the US because if we can't save them, they just couldn't be saved. But that one fucked me up real bad for obvious reasons. But thank you for letting me share that.
Thank you for sharing.
It's hard to share, and people who've never traveled outside the US don't understand what it's like elsewhere. So I don't trust very many people with that story. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate that you shared it, and I'm so sorry that that was so hard. That whole situation is very hard. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
Would you do it again?
Would I start EMS again or would I go back?
Let's both.
I've been back half dozen more times.
Have you? You went back? Girl, you are a tough ass bitch. Jesus Christ, dude.
I had to set the record straight. For my own sake, I had to show them that they didn't win. And it brings me such fulfillment to go and do the work there. I think sometimes people think I do it for to extend goodness to the patients I get to care for there, but really I do it because it brings me such fulfillment. And half of the tips and tricks I know how to do in EMS, I have learned from my colleagues there who don't have all the resources that you and I have. So they figure out how to do things other ways. And that's where I've learned how to do things. But yes, I've been back many more times. I haven't been back since this past January. That was my last time in country. You can't fly there right now. There's currently an FAA ban on any United States aircraft traveling to that particular country. So I physically cannot get there right now. Um, but EMS, yeah, yeah.
You would.
I don't think you can take the EMS out of the girl. You can take the girl out of the EMS, but I really enjoy the work that I get to do. I especially love getting to work side by side with my paramedic partners. I have one partner that she is just the world's most incredible human being. She's not old enough to be a work mom, but she's definitely a work big sister. Like, I hope everybody has a work mom, like someone who just like loves you and mentors you and teaches you things clinically, but also teaches you things about life. Like, I just love it. And I'm to the age now where sometimes I'm the work
Oh,
mom.
I feel that. I feel that so hard.
Yeah, yeah, but it's fun. It's fun. I love EMS and I hope to never have to leave the bedside in the ER or the helicopter. I want to always do it because I really enjoy
And
it.
I think you will. I think you absolutely will until you cannot. But I want to give you the opportunity to do any shout outs or to talk about any subjects that you think that we haven't covered yet in this episode.
My goodness, you're such a good interviewer. Like,
Thanks.
if I didn't know any better, I would say you had a past career as, some kind of TV host or
Oh,
something.
thanks.
Um, no, I think we've talked about the most important things, the things that I am passionate about, investing in ourselves. And I'm so freaking proud of you for exploring other hobbies and doing things outside of work. So that's just, if I could culminate my advice to people, is making sure that you're pouring as much time, energy, money, effort into growing yourself as a human being as you are with your jobs, right? We got to continually get those certs, our ACLS, BLS, PALS, our TPATC, PHTLS, NRP, all of them, right? All the time and money and energy that we spend doing those, I hope we're spending that much in getting coaching or taking a yoga class or meeting with a therapist, or sometimes I fantasize about throwing my phone in a body of water and disconnecting, right?
Yes.
So doing those things to care for who we are as human beings and fostering these relationships. So
I would
thank
like to
you.
touch on a feeling that, like, you will feel guilty if you haven't had a hobby or you haven't spent money on yourself or you haven't done anything for a long time. Like, you will feel guilty for spending that money on you. Don't feel guilty. If you feel guilty for it, you're probably doing the right thing, right? Because you're doing it for yourself, and we shouldn't feel guilty for doing things for ourselves.
Hmm. Yeah, for me, it's not money spent, it's time spent. I'll feel guilty. Like the rule for myself, I have a lot of rules for me. One of my rules was I'm not allowed to watch TV unless I'm doing something productive. So I'm either working out while watching TV or folding laundry while watching TV, or I had to be doing something. I wasn't allowed to watch TV because only lazy people just sit on the couch and watch TV was the false narrative I had told
Yeah.
myself. And now I realize there's a few shows that I really love following. Like, it's a great storyline. Um, yeah, so just like you're right. It is a guilty feeling like, oh shoot, I should be doing squats right now
Yes.
while I watch the show, or I should be working on something instead of laying on the rocking chair out on the back patio with my dog in my lap, right? But no, it rest is productive. You mentioned Alex from Emergency Resilience earlier. That's something that she has harped on me. She's a good friend of mine, and I'm so thankful for her mentorship in my life. So I guess if we're going to do shout outs, I'll do that one. Alex,
Okay.
she has taught me rest is productive, and I have seen that. I didn't believe it. I believed the narrative that rest was for lazy people. And I'm not lazy, I'm productive, right? Because my identity was in my productivity. But rest is productive because it makes me a better wife, mom, educator, nurse, whatever, right? It makes me better at all of those things. So that's all I got.
Well, where can we find you, Miss Nurse Gwenny?
Yeah, so the Nurse Gwenny platform, I am on Instagram and TikTok. So I try to put out a reel every day, but I've only recently given myself permission that, like, if I'm not feeling it today, like, the FBI will not be showing up at my door to arrest me if I don't post a reel every day.
That is true.
So I post a reel almost every day, and I try to just do little educational tidbits. Most of it comes from patients I take care of or things that I learn or questions from followers. A lot of my content comes from followers that are like, I don't understand why XYZ. I'm like, okay, perfect. That's going to be tomorrow's video. Or it can hop in line with the other 122 unread emails right now with content ideas. But I have a couple of books also. My textbook that is it's available on Amazon. It's called But Why. So if you can just search But Why, But Wipes will pop up for you first. But no, just keep typing. It'll change to But Why by Gwenny Lawson. And it's 309 practice test questions with the correct answer and the rationale that will help you understand it. I tell my students all the time through my impact classes that I teach, if you want to come sit in one of my in-person classes, look on our website at impactems.com. Click on the events tab and you'll see the flight medical provider course. I don't want you to memorize information. I don't want you to memorize facts. I want you to understand concepts. And if you're sitting in front of a test, you can walk yourself to the correct answer. Or if you have the patient in front of you, you can walk yourself to whatever needs to be done for the patient because you understand the concept. You didn't just memorize words. And so that's what my book strives to do. And I get probably a DM every other day from somebody who says, your book helped me understand something I've been trying to learn about for decades. Like I had a flight uh, provider who sat in one of my classes last fall, and he said, I've been flying for 19 years and I've never truly understood balloon pump waveforms until you explained it the way you did. And now I totally get why I've been doing all the things that I've been doing just because I knew those were the things I was supposed to do. Now I understand the why. And that for me is, oh, dopamine hit when someone tells me it helps it to click for them. So that's my book, But Why? And then I have another book that's called 50 Reminders, Affirmations, and Validation for Nurses in the form of Bible verses, quotes, and a few swears. And that's where I took 50 different like famous quotes from people, and then I applied it to us in healthcare. So, like, one of my favorite ones is I'm open to the idea of being wrong. And I actually have that quote on my resume. I'm open to the idea of being wrong because that's the only thing that keeps me growing. If I dig my heels in and want to insist that I am right about all of my current beliefs, then I'm never going to get better at what I'm doing. I won't grow. One more centimeter, I won't grow. And so I have to be open to the idea that I might be wrong about something because there are things that I've learned from you in this hour and a half that we've been spending together today that I wouldn't have learned if I would have made the decision that I'm already right about everything that I know. Right. And think about medicine. Like everything that we know to be true, we now know is not true. Like I can't keep straight. Like when does TXA work? When does TXA not work? Okay, when are we supposed to? Okay, we're doing it for GI bleeds. We're not doing it for GI head injuries. No, we're not doing that anymore. Like it changes all the time.
Yeah, it
So I have
does.
to be open to the idea of being wrong because that's what's going to keep me growing. So my 50 reminders and validations for nurses, if you just search on Amazon, Gwenny Lawson 50 reminders, you'll find it. Or you can order any of my books directly from me. You just DM me on TikTok or Instagram. And Mr. Nurse Gwenny, my husband, my business manager, he will ship them to you. But yeah, that's where you can find me. Thank you so
No,
much.
thank you. What a phenomenal conversation. And I really meant what I said earlier. Like a lot of the time people end the conversation and they're like, I really felt like I was in some type of therapy session and that's how I feel walking out today. Like, it's just an amazing conversation with you. You are a phenomenal human being. And I'm like, right now, EMS and nursing, we're so lucky to have such a dedicated educator. So thank you so much for doing what you do. Thank you so much for coming on to the Noon podcast today. I really appreciate you so much, Gwenny, and I hope you have a phenomenal day.
Thank you so much.
We'll talk soon, Gwenny. Bye. Thanks for tuning in. If you're enjoying the show and want to show your support, be sure to check out the Noon merch store on Bonfire. Find the link in the description below. Also, if you have any guest suggestions or if you're interested in being a guest on Noon yourself, visit the website at www.samspursuit.com to get in touch.